Okay, good morning, everyone. First off, I know many of you want to know already about the horrible attack that we have heard of that took place in Ankara, in Turkey today. We do expect a statement on this later, but I don't have it for you right now. But certainly, as you might expect, we condemn this violence and we express our condolences to all the victims of this horrific attack. Turning to the situation in Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that Palestinians in North Gaza Governorate are experiencing extreme suffering as this Israeli siege there continues. OCHA says there are harrowing levels of death, injury, and destruction in the north. Civilians are trapped under rubble. The sick and wounded are going without life-saving health care. Families lack food. Their homes have been destroyed. They have no shelter, and nowhere is safe. International humanitarian law demands that civilians have the essentials they need to survive. That's food, shelter, medical care, and other critical assistance. OCHA appeals once again for rapid, unimpeded humanitarian relief, which must reach civilians in need. Our partners on the ground report that 2 water stations in North Gaza have stopped operating due to the lack of fuel. The suspension of service is affecting large areas, including the neighborhoods of Al-Daraj, Al-Tufa, Al-Zarqa, and Sheikh Radwan. A request earlier this week to deliver 23,000 liters of fuel to North Gaza Governorate was denied by Israeli authorities. From the 6th of October through yesterday, several attempts to get fuel to Gaza Governorate were also denied. Another mission was impeded and therefore unable to be accomplished. The UN and our partners have also been compelled to postpone the polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza due to the escalating violence, intense bombardment, mass displacement orders, and the lack of assured humanitarian pauses across most of the north. This final phase of the vaccination effort was supposed to begin today with the aim of reaching more than 119,000 children across northern Gaza. The current conditions, including ongoing attacks on civilian infrastructure, continue to jeopardize people's safety and movement in northern Gaza, making it impossible for families to safely bring their children for vaccination and for health workers to operate. It's imperative to stop the polio outbreak in Gaza before more children are paralyzed and the virus spreads. To interrupt transmission, at least 90% of all children in every community and neighborhood must be vaccinated. The vaccination campaign must be facilitated in the north through the implementation of humanitarian pauses. Our humanitarian partners say that all logistics, supplies, and trained personnel were prepared to vaccinate children across the north with their second dose of the polio vaccine. However, given that the area currently approved for temporary humanitarian pauses was substantially reduced in geographic size from the previous round of the vaccination campaign and is now limited only to Gaza City, many children in northern Gaza would have missed out on a second dose. We and our humanitarian partners continue our efforts to get assistance to people in northern Gaza. On the 15th of October, the World Food Programme was able to deliver 1 convoy into Gaza City. However, the Israeli siege on North Gaza Governorate has prevented the agency from reaching people there for the past 3 weeks. WFP warns that September and October saw some of the lowest levels of humanitarian aid entering Gaza since late 2023, alongside a drastic reduction in commercial cargo. In October to date, only 20% of the agency's operational food needs have entered Gaza. A drastic shortage of supplies across Gaza has almost halted general food distribution. WFP says very limited aid supplies have entered the south due to insecurity at the Kerem Shalom crossing point. There's a critical need for a safe and enabling environment for humanitarian operations and convoy movements into and within Gaza. Intense strikes by the Israeli Defense Forces into Lebanon and by Hezbollah into Israel continued over the last 24 hours. The IDF struck various locations in Beirut, as well as Bekaa, Jazin, Mount Lebanon, Nabateh, Sidon, and in the UNIFIL area of operations. Today, the IDF issued a displacement notice designating a large area within the city of Deir, inside UNIFIL's area of operations, which was then subsequently hit by numerous airstrikes. Hezbollah continued to fire rockets into northern and central Israel, including towards sites near the Blue Line. Yesterday, UNIFIL detected 1,028 trajectories of projectiles across the Blue Line, the majority originating from south of the Blue Line, targeting areas including Al-Khawza, Aitarun, Markaba, Talusa, Etaibe, El-Qiyam, Kafar Kela, and 82 trajectories of projectiles were recorded from north of the Blue Line. The mission also continued to record a high level of violations of Lebanese airspace. The mission reports that the ongoing hostilities in its area of operations are continuing to affect the safety and security of peacekeepers and their ability to implement UNIFIL's mandate. Yesterday evening, UNIFIL observed the impacts of airstrikes near its headquarters and the Green Hill area close to Al-Naqura, causing some damage. After midnight, 2 UNIFIL vehicles engaged in a medical evacuation encountered a roadblock during their operation near Yarin. The convoy was then subjected to small arms fire, resulting in damage to one of the vehicles, which had to be left at the location. The team managed to safely extricate themselves from the scene without any casualties. Yesterday, Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health announced that at least 63 individuals were killed and 234 were injured in Israeli attacks across Lebanon in the preceding 24 hours. We condemn the rising toll on civilians and civilian infrastructure and civilian loss of lives. We remind all parties on the ground of their obligations under international law to respect and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. We again remind the parties of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and to respect the inviolability of UN premises at all times. UN peacekeepers continue to remain in their positions despite the very challenging situation. UNIFIL continued supporting the Lebanese Red Cross, and assistance was also extended to the Lebanese civil defense. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the ongoing attacks across Lebanon continue to cause death and destruction, with civilians killed, injured, or forced to flee to safer areas. Since the escalation of hostilities a year ago, more than 2,500 people in Lebanon have been killed and nearly 12,000 injured, according to official figures. And today, the United Nations Development Program released a rapid appraisal, warning that Lebanon's economy could shrink by as much as 9.2% if these hostilities continue through the end of the year. UNDP estimates that rising unemployment will affect approximately 1.2 million workers across the country. The unemployment rate may increase to a staggering 32.6% by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the country's healthcare system has come under severe pressure. The World Health Organization has documented 47 attacks on medical facilities since October 8, 2023, with 95 health workers killed and 77 injured while on duty. Nearly half of the more than 200 primary health posts and clinics in the areas impacted by the hostilities have closed. 6 hospitals are no longer operational, and 4 are only partially functioning. Meanwhile, our partners supporting health, water, sanitation, and hygiene are working to contain the risk of cholera after the first case in Lebanon was reported since the end of the outbreak that happened between 2022 and 2023. They report that insecurity and restricted access in northern parts of Bekaa and Baalbek are constraining their efforts. For its part, UNICEF has warned that the ongoing bombardment is also impacting water infrastructure, with at least 28 water facilities damaged, affecting supplies for more than 360,000 people, primarily in southern Lebanon. Across the country, nearly 1,100 shelters for people displaced within Lebanon have been opened and now host more than 191,000 people, approximately 1/4 of people displaced inside the country. Over 900 of these shelters, that's 82%, are already full. The highest concentration of collective shelters is in Beirut and Mount Lebanon Governorate. The UN Relief and Works Agency is operating nearly a dozen emergency shelters across Lebanon, with more than 3,700 displaced people registered there to date. As hostilities continue, we and our partners are doing everything possible to support people in need across the country. The World Food Programme is providing hot meals, food parcels, fresh bread, sandwiches, ready-to-eat parcels, and emergency cash assistance. WFP is also setting up kitchens and hot meal operations in northern and central Lebanon to prepare light meals for people seeking safety in shelters. In Syria, UNHCR is supporting the transport of the most vulnerable families arriving in Syria from the borders to their destinations inside Syria. More than 32,000 individuals were able to reach their intended destinations inside Syria as a result of the service. UNHCR and its partners are distributing core relief and winter items for them. And we have a quick update from the Office of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg. A series of political dialogues with Yemeni actors were held in Amman, Jordan, as part of the ongoing efforts to build momentum towards a peaceful and inclusive resolution to the conflict in Yemen. These meetings have so far included discussions with representatives of the Rashad Party, the Nasrite Party, and the Yemeni Socialist Party, as well as civil society groups. Regarding the political process, there was a strong call to address the root causes of Yemen's conflict through a phased approach to the transition process, focusing on restoring state institutions and ensuring the withdrawal of armed groups. More discussions will follow in the coming weeks and into 2025 with Yemeni political parties and entities and Yemeni civil society groups, including youth, women, and marginalized people. The Secretary General is in Kazan in the Russian Federation, where he's attending the Brics summit. He will address the summit tomorrow and will discuss how September's Summit of the Future offered a roadmap for strengthening multilateralism and advancing peace, sustainable development, and human rights. We'll provide the transcript once he delivers his remarks. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina J. Mohammed, arrived in Washington, D.C. this morning to participate in the IMF World Bank annual meetings. She spoke alongside Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados at the Rockefeller Foundation event on driving innovation in the international financial architecture. Later this afternoon, the Deputy Secretary General will deliver remarks at the 12th ministerial meeting of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Throughout her engagements, the Deputy Secretary General will relay the agreement forged by heads of states in the Pact for the Future, including its call for reforms to the international financial architecture to lift the Sustainable Development Goals. These reforms aim to enhance the voice and representation of developing countries, dramatically expand development finance, make borrowing more sustainable, and strengthen the global safety net. The Deputy Secretary General will invite the international financial institutions to work with the UN in implementing the Pact's commitments. The Deputy Secretary General will also advocate for robust replenishment to the International Development Association, the World Bank's facility for supporting the world's poorest and most vulnerable countries, to enable it to continue its vital work. She'll return to New York on Friday. This morning, Valentin Rugwabiza, the head of the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, known as MINUSCA, briefed Security Council members. She said there is positive momentum and opportunity stemming from the dialogue between the government and active armed groups, as well as the progress made in the implementation of the political agreement. She called on regional and sub-regional organizations, in particular the guarantors of the political agreement, to further support the ongoing political momentum by facilitating engagement between the government and armed group leaders who expressed willingness to renounce violence. Ms. Rugwabiza also said that preparations for local elections have continued to progress, with momentum driven by the government's sustained commitment to the elections and MINUSCA's support and technical assistance. Her full remarks are online. And this afternoon, the Security Council will hold a briefing on the situation in Syria. Special Envoy Geir Peterson will brief, as well as Edem Wasurnu, OCHA's Director of Operations and Advocacy. And the latest report of the Secretary General on Women, Peace and Security was released yesterday evening. The report says that the effects of war and conflict on women and girls are worsening. Last year, the proportion of women killed in armed conflicts doubled compared to 2022, and 4 out of every 10 people who died because of conflict in 2023 were women. The report also says that UN-verified cases of conflict-related sexual violence increased by 50%. These increases in deaths and violence against women are taking place against a backdrop of increasingly blatant disregard of international law designed to protect women and children during war. The report, which was led by UN Women, says that every day 500 women and girls in conflict-affected countries die from complications related to pregnancy and childbirth. By the end of 2023, 180 women were giving birth every day in Gaza, most without necessities or medical care. You can find the full report online. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. On the Secretary General's meetings and visit to Kazan, it's been reported that he received a warm welcome from Russian President Vladimir Putin And I wonder if you could tell us whether they're going to hold a bilateral and whether the issue of ceasefires in Gaza and an end to the Ukraine war might be raised. And also, these reports say that there has been some opposition to his actually meeting the Russian president.
At present, obviously, we wait until meetings happen to fully confirm them, but he does intend to meet tomorrow with President Putin. During that meeting, the Secretary General will reaffirm his well-known positions on the war in Ukraine and the conditions for a just peace based on the UN Charter, international law, and the resolutions of the United Nations. He will continue to pursue his efforts to reestablish safe navigation in the Black Sea, which is critically important for global food and energy security, especially for the most vulnerable countries around the world. And you'd asked about the Middle East, and we do expect, obviously, that in his many discussions with the leaders present at the Brics Summit, he will bring up the situation throughout the region.
And any comment on protests or opposition to this meeting?
I think I'd describe for you the point of the meeting at the time that we were discussing this yesterday. But he's attending this Brics Summit as he did with the previous session in South Africa, and it's a standard practice that he has of attending meetings of organizations with large numbers of important member states, such as the G7 and the G20, and that's why he is participating in this one. Amelie.
Thanks, Farhan. Follow up on Kazan as well. Several BRIC leaders mention their willingness to do some kind of mediation between the Russian president and his Ukrainian counterpart. I mean, how is the Secretary General receiving these offers, and is he himself ready to offer his mediation effort in the war? Thank you.
I think the Secretary General is determining when the conditions are right for more direct involvement. Obviously, he stands ready when the parties are willing to offer his services, but again, he will continue to monitor and see when the situation is right. And while you've been waiting, I have the following to read to you. The Secretary General strongly condemns the terrorist attack on Turkish Aerospace Industries facilities in Ankara. He expresses his deepest condolences to the victims and their families, and wishes a speedy and full recovery to those injured. The United Nations stands in solidarity with the people and government of the Republic of Türkiye, and you'll receive that in your emails shortly. Javier?
Yes, Farhan, on Haiti. Yesterday at the Security Council, the Haitian ambassador asked for international help to stop mass deportation from the Dominican Republic. Only in October, 27,000 Haitians have been forcibly deported. 27,000. Haiti being far from a safe and secure place to return. Is the Secretary General concerned? Are these deportations a violation of international humanitarian law? Are you going to intervene with the Dominican government?
Obviously, we stand against any forced movements of people, including forced deportations. This is something that the UN Refugee Agency has raised concerns with, and we expect that they will be in the lead in dealing with any concerns about this. Beyond that, I would just refer you over to our colleagues at UNHCR. Yes, Gabriel.
Thank you, Farhan. There are very few journalists left in Gaza, particularly in the north. How important is it that those journalists in the north of Gaza continue to be able to do their job to document what is happening there, and who is responsible for their safety?
It's crucially important for journalists to be able to do their job everywhere, including in Gaza. We've seen over the past year a very large number of journalists, along with others such as medical professionals, humanitarian workers, and our own UNRWA staff, face violence and be killed in alarmingly high numbers. They need to be protected by all of the fighting forces on the ground, and of course we call, given the killings of the last year, we call on Israel and Hamas to make sure that reporters are spared.
Farhan, in late January, the Secretary General called on Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent acts of genocide within the scope of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. That's what the Secretary General said in late January. Nearly 11 months later, does the Secretary General think Israel has done that?
He continues to have the same call as he did before, and obviously the fact that the fighting goes on is a matter of concern. Deji.
A follow-up on the situation in North Gaza. We just saw this video that Israeli IDF gathering civilians to make them live. Here is what the IDF and Israel, they described this. They said they allow civilians to leave Jabalia in a very safe manner. Do you think this tank with gunpoints, all the civilians leaving Jabalia is like a orderly, safely manner, or is that just force displacing?
We would need more information about exactly how this was carried out, but obviously we have our concerns to make sure that in fact those who are moving are doing so freely and of their own volition, and that they have safe places where they can go.
Do you think they leave there freely and willingly? You look at this. You look at these photos. Do you think those people are queuing up there?
I'm not going to play the game of
freely?
judging based on a single photograph.
Oh,
but
there are a lot, actually.
But obviously, our colleagues on the ground have expressed their concerns, as I've been telling you about regularly, and those concerns continue to apply. Abdulhamid, and then you.
Thank you, Farhan. Abdullah Hawash is a little boy of 11-year-old. He was throwing a little stone on the Israeli jeep in Nablus, and they responded by a shot in the head and killed him right in front of the camera. And if you didn't see the video, I will send it to you and to Tor Winsland also. Do you have any comment on that specific incident?
We are certainly, our hearts go out to the family members of this poor child who was killed, and his killing needs to be thoroughly investigated. Yes, please.
Thanks, Farhan. On Ukraine and DPRK, in the past 2 weeks, there have been reports from Ukraine and the South Korean governments that North Korea sent and will send its troops to Russia to fight against Ukraine. And earlier today, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin confirmed these reports. So my question is this a violation of a relevant Security Council resolution? And does the Secretary General have comments on these developing issues?
Well, regarding whether there's a violation of Security Council resolutions, that matter is for the Security Council's Sanctions Committee on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to determine. So we'll leave the matter in their hands. But certainly we call on all countries to abide by the resolutions of the Security Council, including those concerning the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And with that, I wish you all a good afternoon.